Hello and welcome to GameTech. Are you ready for more modern accessories for your retro gaming needs? Well good, because first up is a modern accessory for modern gaming. That's right, I'm all about clickbait here at GameTech, but you still might be interested, and I do find a few retro games to use with it. Check it out. First up is the mClassic game console graphics processor from Marseille. This device was crowdfunded on Indiegogo, and at the time I'm making this video, it's not even done yet, and it's made way more than its initial goal. It costs $99 at retail, but if you pledge to the Indiegogo, you got it for $79. So, what is this? Well, it's a plug-and-play HDMI dongle that you can plug into the back of your console, and it supposedly improves the graphics and upscales them. It requires that you hook up a USB cable to power it. Inside the box, you get the dongle itself, a red USB cable, as well as a little HDMI extension cable if you need it. There are no operating instructions anywhere. The front of the box here makes three pretty big claims. Better graphic, better pixels, better gameplay. Let's put each of these claims to the test. First up is better graphic. There's a 3-position switch on the side of the dongle. When there's no light on, it's passing the HDMI signal straight through without messing with it. The middle selection lights up green and is called full processing, and it turns the scaling on. The final position, it lights up blue and it outputs a 4:3 image with processing applied, but only if you input a 4:3 resolution. First, let's try the GameCube with the Insurrection Industries Carby HDMI adapter. Here's what F-Zero GX looks like on its own without the mClassic running in 480p. And here's what it looks like with the mClassic upscaled to 1080p. There's no magic happening here, folks, but it does a decent job of upscaling. And it should also be known that the mClassic will not upscale your image if it's running in 480i. It must be in progressive mode. Let's try the PlayStation 3. First up, Soul Calibur 4. This fighting game normally runs at 720p and 60 frames per second, and normally it looks pretty good. Running it with the mClassic, upscaling it to 1080p, I was actually kind of surprised at how decent it looks. Freezing the image, zooming way in, and splitting the screen, I can indeed see that the mClassic really isn't as bad as I thought it might be, at least for a 720p PS3 game. The smoothing that it does is actually kind of nice. It doesn't even screw up text like you think it might. Now for Resident Evil Revelations, another 720p game. This one doesn't seem to improve as much, plus there's a gamma shift. The mClassic is slightly darker than the game should be. The mClassic can also upscale to 1440p, but when connected to my 4K TV, it only goes as high as 1080p, so you're going to need a computer monitor for that. It can also upscale Blu-rays to a full 4K, but keep in mind that this can't add any detail that's not on the disc. Now, let's try Wii games running on the Wii U using its HDMI output. It literally makes zero difference in Super Mario Galaxy here. Same with Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth. And that's too bad because this game looks way too soft. How about some Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild on the Wii U? It actually does smooth out some of the jaggies on this one, but it also adds a bit of sharpening artifacts to the edges. Okay, how about PlayStation 4 games that already run in 1080p? I know this isn't exactly retro gaming like the name of the episode implies, but hey, I've got to try it. Not much of a difference in Spider-Man other than a very slight gamma shift. Night Trap seems to look identical either way, like crap. 1080p resolutions don't seem to benefit. So, better graphic? Yeah, maybe in some 720p games, but, well, how about better pixels? Well, in Sonic Mania, it literally makes no difference in the pixels at all. They're the same. Okay, so the pixels aren't really better, but how about that last claim? Better gameplay! What better game to test this on than Bebe's Kids on the Super Nintendo? For this, I'm using a disassembled Eon Super 64 plugged into the mClassic. Well, the mClassic certainly doesn't improve gameplay. This last claim is false! Okay, just for fun, let's try it on the Genesis Mini, which outputs 720p. Ugh. Yeah, I'm not liking the so-called enhancements here. Oh, and the mClassic hates the 960p output from the OSSC. It practically breaks it. The output from the FrameMeister is fine, though it doesn't change any of the graphics at all. The mClassic basically puts shadows and halos around the edges of an image to give the illusion of it being sharper, but doing that also results in a slight loss of detail. To accomplish the anti-aliasing effects, it basically applies a smudge filter to the edges, similar to many emulation filters, and then applies the sharpening filter. And it does this all very, very fast, because there is really no appreciable lag at all. Overall, I'd say that the mClassic is a good device to improve your native 720p games from the last generation, and it's not horrible with 480p games. But honestly, it's really not something that I'd personally use. So keep in mind that the mClassic just can't add detail that's not there. A 720p game will never have the amount of detail that a native 1080p game will. You might also get similar results to cranking up the sharpness and contrast on your TV, but I really don't recommend doing that. Anyway, I'm not done talking about the mClassic, but in the meantime, here's something that I really think is cool. Here is the GBA Consolizer from Woozle and GameTech. This is exactly what it sounds like, a console that plays Game Boy Advance games without having to fuss with a GameCube or anything like that. In fact, the hardware inside is a real Game Boy Advance, and Woozle has created the necessary implementation so you can play it on your HD TV using a Super Nintendo controller. And I've got to say, it's pretty awesome. You buy this as a kit for around $170 and mod your own original Game Boy Advance. I've also heard that you can buy the entire thing pre-assembled, but at a much higher cost, and no, I don't have a number on that. You'll need a standard Super NES controller and a mini to regular HDMI cable. It's powered by USB, just like everything seems to be these days. On the top, you plug in your Game Boy Advance cartridge, flip the switch, and you're pretty much good to go. The GBA Consolizer outputs 720p video, and it looks really, really good. During gameplay, if you press down and select simultaneously, you access the GBA Consolizer menu. Under the video category, you can enable smoothness for emulator-like smoothing options if that's what you like. There's also some zoom options. 4x is the default and is integer scaled. 4.5x will fill the 720p screen completely, but it isn't a perfect integer scale. It looks fine though, as there's some good interpolation provided. 5x zooms it in even more, just in case you want to cut off the top and the bottom of the screen. I mean, who wants to look at that anyway? The shader option allows you to approximate different looks of running Game Boy Advance games on different hardware, including the PSP for some reason. I mean, if you're gonna do that, where are the Game Gear, Nomad, and Turbo Express options? Personally, I've been happy leaving the shader on GBA. I also leave the gamma at 2.2. The scanline options are cool as they give you varying levels of LCD grid scan lines and even horizontal CRT scan lines if that's what you want. In the wizard category, you can adjust your own custom palette. Under the system category, you'll find some important options. The DVI Plus mode can be enabled or disabled. When it's off, you need to run analog audio out of the Game Boy Advance headphone jack as it's not sent over the HDMI. With the DVI Plus mode enabled, audio is routed over HDMI, but your TV may not like it. I know a couple of my capture devices don't like it, but another one really does. One of my TVs gets weird glitchy graphics on the sides if I enable the DVI Plus mode, but otherwise it displays everything perfectly. I'm not sure why sending audio over the HDMI screws things up, but it can. I'm guessing that this is just not a proper HDMI implementation. Also, in some games, when DVI Plus mode is enabled, there's lots of audio distortion present, which isn't there if you just send the audio out the headphone jack. Check out this example from Smashing Drive. A and B swap lets you use the Y and B buttons on your Super NES pad as the Game Boy Advance B and A buttons, and I much prefer this on. Audio LPF means low pass filter, and enabling it can make the audio slightly less shrill, though you'll still get a lot of that typical Game Boy Advance fuzziness. Also, the low pass filter only affects the audio that's going over the HDMI. Lastly, don't forget to save your settings if you've changed anything. As far as the gameplay goes, everything is perfect obviously because this is a real Game Boy Advance. That means everything is compatible, even regular Game Boy games and Game Boy Color games. Though you will get the default color screen that the Game Boy Advance gives Game Boy games, which is pretty ugly. You can change this by holding certain buttons and directions as you boot, if you can remember which ones. I never can. Fortunately, the palette option allows you to set the default color for when you insert a normal Game Boy game. Set it to C2 if you prefer black and white like me. There's even a $140 version of the GBA Consolizer that replaces the screen and you hold it like a normal system. So that means games like Kirby, Tilt and Tumble and whatnot work just fine. I knew that I would like this device, but honestly, I didn't know that I'd like it as much as I do. And it worked really well for the Metroidvania episode that I just did. While the Game Boy interface for the GameCube is still awesome, this is another amazing option if you don't want to go that route or you just want a standalone device. I really liked the Game Boy Advance back in the day, and I'm glad it's getting some HD attention these days. I wish they could build a similar device for the DS and hell, even the 3DS if that's even possible. Anyway, let's take a look at some cables that are new to the market. Or are they? Here are the Level Hike series of HDMI upscaling cables for various retro consoles, which cost around $40 each. They sent me cables for consoles that don't get enough love, like the NeoGeo, the TurboGrafx 16, and even the Sony PSP. Included with each is an HDMI cable as well as a USB cable to provide power. However, try it without the included USB cable first, as it may not need it to power up. Definitely don't plug it in unless you need it. Anyway, let's try the NeoGeo cable first, and don't try to plug this into a Genesis Model 1. Right away, you see that the video signal defaults to stretching the image across the screen. Fortunately, there's a switch on the device which lets you choose between 16:9 and 4:3. There, much better. The video signal is tapped from the console's RGB source and is scaled up to 720p. The quality is identical to the pound HDMI cables and other devices from China, which are usually sold on Amazon. In fact, the insides are exactly the same as the pound cables, as well as other cables that have that same box shape. The result is kind of dark, soft, with oversaturated colors with a sharpening filter applied on top of it all. Also, like the pound cables, this interprets the 240p signal as 480i and it tries to deinterlace it when it doesn't need to be deinterlaced. As a result, the flashing shadows underneath the characters in almost every single NeoGeo fighting game will have interlacing combing artifacts that shouldn't be there. As for lag, well, it's definitely here. According to Bob at RetroRGB and his 960 frames per second nonsense, the average is about 2.5 frames. It's not unplayable, at least when you suck at games like I do, but it's there. Also, you only get mono sound since it takes all of its audio from the rear AV output. Though you can still plug in stereo headphones, I guess. Next up is the TurboGrafx 16 cable, which plugs into the rear expansion slot of the system. This means you can't use it with CD games or peripherals like the Super SD System 3. It's molded to the shape of the TurboGrafx expansion slot, so that means you can't plug it into any of the Japanese consoles like the PC Engine or the SuperGrafx. The video quality here is the same as the NeoGeo cable, a bit dark, soft, and oversaturated. You don't need to use the USB cable to power this one either, and no, it won't make things look any better if you do. Unfortunately, I can see some noise in the plain colors here, like in the green background on Bonk's Revenge. The good news is that at least the games are in stereo and they sound great. Last is the PSP cable, and I was really looking forward to trying these. I've always had issues recording PSP games with the component video output, as it sucks and there's really no good way to scale it well, at least not that I know of. You'll need a PSP that can accept the analog component cables to use this. One thing that's really nice is that the cable is about 10 feet long, so you don't need to be inches away from your TV. And you'll definitely need to plug in that USB cable to power it. Then on your PSP, you'll need to navigate to the connected display settings, switch video output, and turn it on. And it works! Instead of a 16:9 and a 4:3 switch, this one has a menu and game switch. This is because games take up far less resolution than the menu, and moving the switch over to game mode zooms it in to make it take up more of the screen. And yes, it's still a lot softer than I'd like, but I was still kind of excited because it doesn't look too horrible and it's a lot easier than the other solutions that I've tried. Sadly, there is some noise in the image. It was actually much worse for me when I tried this cable on this very game yesterday, but now that I'm capturing video, it's not quite as bad for whatever reason. And also, the shape of the image isn't quite right. They stretched the image too wide. Okay, just for a goof, let's see what it looks like when we hook up the mClassic to the level hike PSP cable. I hope I have enough open USB ports for this setup. The menu screen looks fine, though certainly not significantly improved. Castlevania Dracula X Chronicles looks the same, maybe a bit more contrasty. Keep in mind that the level height cables upscale the 480p video to 720p, and the mClassic is scaling the 720p to 1080p. A split screen of Ease 7 here reveals that there is next to no difference when adding the mClassic to the mix. Oh well, I had to try. Anyway, here's the best I can get with PSP video using the OSSC, which costs around $150. And that's without a remote or even a power supply, not to mention the cost of Sony's PSP component cables. It's definitely sharper and the colors are better, but the OSSC is kind of a pain to deal with. Look at this line here in the image. No matter what I do, I can't get rid of that. And the image is shifted downwards towards the bottom of the screen. The level height cable is around $40, and while it certainly doesn't look as nice, there are no settings that need to be dialed in by an expert. However, I still wish there were a truly awesome video solution for the PSP. Overall, these cables give you what you pay for. They don't cost much, so don't expect much. The level height cables are good for people who just want to hook up their consoles to their TV and quality really isn't an issue. There are people like that out there. But I do give them props for supporting the PSP. That's kind of cool, actually. But what if you just want to use your existing cables and you don't want to have to buy something expensive like the FrameMeister or the OSSC? Well, there's a solution for that too. This is the RetroTink 2X video line doubler from Mike Chi. Basically, this $100 device is something that helps you play pretty much any analog video source on your HD TV. It has inputs for composite, S-video, and even component. It outputs this via mini HDMI, and of course it's powered by a 5-volt USB source. This device is really simple, and that's what I like about it. In fact, there are only 2 buttons on it. This one lets you cycle through each input. You really should only have one input hooked up at a time though. And you'll know when you've selected the correct input when your image appears in color. It'll take your image to make this look like this. I'm just kidding. This is actually the PS2 game called Assault Suits Vulcan, which is a port of Cybernator on the Super NES. But I know some of you fell for that. This device doesn't upscale images, it line doubles them very quickly, which means there's no lag. The top output resolution here is 480p. For a lot of the game footage, I'm using my handy dandy SCART to component transcoder. The other button here lets you select between 3 modes. First is a direct throughput. So if you're playing a 240p game, it sends the 240p over the HDMI, and some TVs don't like that at all. Press it again for the line double mode, which is 480p. Lastly, press it once more for the exciting smooth mode. Personally, I prefer never to enable this, but your taste may vary. Anyway, the RetroTink 2X does a great job. Everything is very sharp, though your TV still needs to scale to 480p to its own native resolution, which may or may not add a little fuzziness. What's more is that it can seamlessly handle the interlacing in Sonic 2's 2-player mode. It doesn't lose any sync when the game switches to it or back to 240p. And yes, that means all of the 32-bit games that constantly switch back and forth between 240p and 480i are virtually seamless, and you'll never lose picture. This is refreshing compared to something like the FrameMeister, which takes a few weeks before it decides to display a picture again. Does it make games like Dirt Track Effects on the Super Nintendo A-list material? No, but at least you can play your favorite games on your HD TV easily and affordably without having to mod your consoles. Here's the PlayStation 2 using HD Retrovision component cables playing games in 480i. As you can see, it looks pretty good as it uses a Bob deinterlace function, which basically acts like a real interlace signal, except that it's actually progressive. It's great for people like me who want to capture some footage and edit it. Even on games like Dead or Alive 2 Hardcore, which run at 60 frames per second, it looks really solid in this mode. If you want to have the RetroTink just pass through the signal as 480i like I'm doing here, your TV will deinterlace it and it might even look better that way. But it's not good for capturing and editing as you see tons of interlacing combing artifacts in the motion. Unfortunately, you can't play games that run in 480p through this, not even in pass-through mode, or else you'll get this result. I'd like to see 480p be supported as a pass-through. Let's try hooking the mClassic up to the RetroTink 2X's output. For 16-bit games, it honestly looks pretty bad. Everything is very smeary. But if you enable the smooth mode on the RetroTink, it gets even more smeary. It's kind of hard to believe that this mess is a real Super NES, isn't it? It's fun to experiment with for a goof, but I wouldn't play games seriously like this. The results are slightly better on consoles like the Nintendo 64, which have 3D graphics, though it's still a touch smeary. Once again, enabling the smooth mode doubles the smeariness. The RetroTink 2X even works well to watch old analog formats like VHS and Laserdisc on your HDMI only display.
A Fox Holiday House Party was brought to you by Sega. Married with Children is next.
I like it because I can capture without any interlacing artifacts, yet still preserve that 60 frames per second look. So how would a Laserdisc movie look going through the RetroTink 2X and the mClassic? Is it Blu-ray quality? Well, here's the Laserdisc just with the RetroTink. And here it is with the mClassic added. Now with the mClassic, but with the smooth mode engaged on the RetroTink 2X. Not a giant difference. Though be sure to watch this video at 60 frames per second, otherwise you're only seeing half of the temporal resolution. If we zoom way in, we see that upscalers can only make so much of a difference, and like I said earlier, they can't add detail that's not there. Even zooming in on IMAX footage from Laserdisc reveals the same exact thing. Freezing on a frame, we see that the mClassic actually makes the image look even more blocky than the RetroTink on its own. But engaging the smooth mode on the RetroTink almost makes it look more acceptable. In motion though, at 60 frames per second, it can be very difficult to tell. All said and done, the RetroTink 2X is a cool little device that's great for getting any of your ancient video formats on your HD TV with ease.
Make up your mind.
Why? Get ready, fly!
Man, I cannot even begin to tell you how much I would have loved to have the RetroTink 2X back in 2011 when GameSack started. It would have made it a lot easier to capture quality gameplay footage. There weren't a whole lot of options back then, but what can you do? Anyway, now for the big one. This one I've been looking forward to ever since I heard that it even existed. And wow, let's just get to it. This is the megasd from Terraonion. You may remember them from back when I covered the Super SD System 3 for the PC Engine and the TurboGrafx back in Volume 2 of Modern Accessories for Retro Gaming. Well, this is essentially a similar device for the Genesis and Mega Drive, and it's really cool. So, most of us are familiar with the EverDrive line of flash cartridges, right? Well, this is the same thing, only different. It's a flash cart where you store all of your favorite Genesis and Mega Drive games that you provide on a micro SD card. The cartridge itself is shaped like the Virtua Racing Genesis cart, which I always kinda liked. It's powered by a Xilinx Spartan 6 FPGA and an ARM Cortex M4. So far, every single game I've tried works perfectly, and I've tried quite a lot of them. Yes, it works with the 40 meg Super Street Fighter II, which is the only commercial Genesis game that uses bank switching. And yes, it works with Virtua Racing just fine as well, which originally used the special SVP chip inside the cartridge. It supports a lot more mappers than any other Genesis flash cart. And of course, it plays Master System games as well, since the Genesis is backwards compatible with that console. There's a button on the cartridge which acts as the Master System's pause button if you need it. Does it play 32X games? Of course it does, provided you have a 32X hooked up to your Genesis. And it plays them well. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. It even plays Sega CD games, and you don't need to own a Sega CD system. I've always wanted an optical disc emulator for the Sega CD and wondered how it could even be done, especially since the Sega CD has lots of its own special hardware. It never even occurred to me that they could just make it a cartridge. And that is exactly what Terraonion did. At around $260 US, it certainly isn't cheap. But at the same time, it feels worth it, especially after my Model 1 CD unit died a few years ago. So, how does it all work? For all intents and purposes, extremely well. The menu is clean and easy to navigate. You can even rip your CDs and listen to them if you want, and even CD plus G is supported. There's also some settings you can make in the menu that are worth noting. Auto Region Fix helps you bypass games with region lockout, like Thunder Force 4, which normally wouldn't run on a US Sega Genesis on its own. Definitely leave this enabled. In-game reset allows you to hold up and start to reset back to the main menu. In-game menu allows you to tap up and start, which gives you 5 options. The first 2 are for loading and saving game states. You can save up to 8 states for each game to be resumed later. Unfortunately, like the Mega EverDrive, this can also mess up the sounds in some games. That's because of the way the different CPUs in the Genesis are saved, and I'm not sure that anything can really even be done about this. However, many games will actually fix themselves once a new level loads, or if you die and the level starts over, or even if you just pause and unpause. You may not even have any issues at all, it just depends on the game. Also, only Genesis and Mega Drive games allow for save states. Master System, 32X, Virtua Racing, and CD games do not offer save states. Edit Cheats allows you to put in Game Genie-like cheat codes and whatnot. Reboot Game is essentially like pressing the reset button from your controller. And yes, it even works at that one spot on X-Men, so you don't have to get up and actually go press reset on your console. It also means that you can complete the game on a Nomad, which doesn't have a reset button. Return to Menu takes you back to the megasd menu screen. It should be noted that a few games like Mercs, Moonwalker, Thunder Force 3, and maybe a couple of others can't access the in-game menu since these games disable the V-blank interrupt. Game load reset can be changed between hard and soft. Basically, hard is the most compatible, but you'll see the license screen each time you reset your Genesis unless your system is really old like mine. Just leave it on hard. Per game CD backup means you never have to worry about running out of save space for CD games again. It'll store the save files in the BUP folder on the SD card.
Hey baby, let me store my saves in your BUP.
Select CD BIOS allows you to assign a BIOS for each CD region, and you'll need to do this before you can run CD games. Emulate Seek Time is kind of interesting. Basically, when it's checked, it acts as if the laser has to physically move from one part of the CD to the other. With it unchecked, loading times are slightly faster and other cool things might happen. For example, getting invincibility in Sonic CD now changes the music immediately without the typical silence as the laser seeks, in the Japanese version anyway. Enable Master System FM basically lets you listen to the FM soundtrack of the Master System games that support it. The quality of the FM sound itself is very good and fairly accurate to the real deal. Graphics scaler speedup is really interesting. With this enabled, it makes some games like Batman Returns with scaling and rotating graphics have a bit more CPU help. But this can also make the game run faster as well. Compare the game running on a real Sega CD and the Mega SD here. The Sega CD is playing back these scenes at 12 frames per second, whereas the Mega SD displays them at 20. Quite a difference as you can see. Even the gameplay is affected. They're both running at 20 frames per second, but look at the timers. They were perfectly synced when I started this comparison, but notice how the Mega SD version's clock is moving ahead. And as a result, the game can be much tougher. The gameplay itself runs faster in The Adventures of Batman and Robin though. It runs at 16 frames per second on a real Sega CD and tops out at 20 on the Mega SD. The gameplay on the Mega SD version is smoother and faster. However, what I find really interesting is that their timers stay virtually in perfect sync. And since the gameplay is faster, your reflexes are going to need to be that much better. Games like Soulstar have the same exact frame rate between the Mega SD and a real Sega CD regardless of if the graphics scaler speedup is enabled or not. And the gameplay speed is the same as well. So it really must all depend on the individual game's programming. But go ahead and disable this if you want to have regular Sega CD frame rates and timing. So, are the load times faster than a real disc? Yeah, a little. You'll save nearly a second on most loads. If you tap up and start during a CD game, you can adjust the audio levels, and 80% for both of them are pretty good, so just leave it at that. Back in the main menu, I recommend enabling the treble boost for CD games, especially if you have a Model 1 Genesis. Oh, and you can't run CD games using the megasd if your Genesis is currently attached to a real Sega CD. Same if it's attached to a 32X. Nor can you run Master System games or the Genesis version of Virtua Racing with the 32X attached. Unfortunately, that's just the way the console itself is designed. There's literally no way around it other than just removing the 32X. The megasd also won't work on a CDX or all-in-one systems like the Wonder Mega or JVC XI. It'll work on a Nomad, but you'll have to have it modded to allow audio from the cartridge input. The megasd will work fine with the megasg, however. Just don't get the suffixes for your megas confused. Oh, and you remember the MSU1 capability that the SD2 SNES offered, which allowed for better music in games? Well, the megasd has that too, and here it's called MD+. Here's some examples of what Streets of Rage 2 sounds like. I've even helped make a few MD+ conversions, like Strider here. Or Ease 3, which even phased the audio in and out when you change scenes. I'm sure many more games will get this treatment, and you know what? I'll play and listen to each and every one of them. Overall, I'm loving the megasd, and like I said, it's not cheap, but this is absolutely a premium device when it comes to features. You can't disagree with that.
In an effort to determine where Gibson had been investigating, you analyzed his stomach contents, found buffalo meat, and headed to the only place in the city that serves it, Outer Heaven. Isabella Velvet, a dancer at this place, gives you a description, which allows you to put together a montage of the man Gibson was trying to track down. You then ran this montage through the city's data bank, using Jordan. And that gave you two suspects, Ivan Rodriguez and Freddie Nielsen. But from the condition of Ivan's skin, you determined that there was no possibility he could be a snatcher.
Well, those are some more modern accessories for retro gaming, mostly. And I've got to say, the megasd makes me feel like maybe the Sega consoles are getting a little bit of the respect that Nintendo consoles often enjoy. That's a good thing for everybody. Anyway, what kind of accessories would you like to see me cover in the next one? Let me know. In the meantime, thank you for watching GameSack. Galaxy Force on the Sega Master System, 4 mega power. Graphics that will kill you. Caution, 4 mega power. Oh no! But the mClassic has better graphic. Graphics that will kill you? Better graphic. Well, I think graphics that let you live are probably going to be a little better. Maybe if I combine these, I'll be able to play Galaxy Force on the Sega Master System and survive. Let's try it out. It's only my life. Well, the results are in. The graphics, they still kill you.